And I'll Good morning and welcome to the 9:30 call. It's great to see folks. We know Governor Healy released her budget recommendations for the fiscal year 26 yesterday, and we know that Mass taxpayers will be hosting a special early education briefing on Tuesday, February 4th at 10 a.m. And so I put the link in the chat. I'll add it again as folks are joining. But they're going to go through the line items, provide more context, and then talk about what comes next. And we are also planning a kind of post-budget discussion with neighborhood villages, where we are going to encourage folks to go to the Mass Taxpayers Foundation, kind of get all the scoop and the information, and then we'll have an event, a webinar, a meeting around kind of what does that mean for everybody. And remember, this is the first step in the budget process for the next fiscal year. The governor releases her proposal in January, and then the House in April, and then the Senate in May. And then we know there's a conference committee that comes together to work out the details. And then hopefully by July 1st, we'll have a budget. The highlights that were in the budget for proposal that was released yesterday include that C3 was level funded at $475 million. There was also you'll see the numbers around kind of the subsidy and financial assistance system. It's at $1.1 billion. And we know there's different accounts. The Commonwealth Preschool Partnership Initiative was also funded. And the way that the governor did her budget proposal is there are two different, there's a House one, which is her budget proposal, and then there's a supplemental, a fair share kind of budget that's showing how we're using the fair share dollars for education. So when you look, I'll also put the link for the budget page in the chat. It can be a little bit confusing to understand kind of where everything sits, which is why we should all go to the Mass Taxpayers Foundation meeting February 4th. And so if you have questions, specific questions about the budget, you can message me in chat, you can give us a call, but we'll be happy to see everybody at the Mass Taxpayers Foundation event, where we know Victoria will go through all of the different line items. And this week, we know we've had quite a week here on the 9:30 call, and we're happy to be capping it off with Joe Kriesberg from MassINC. And fun fact, Joe is sitting down the hall from me because last December, Strategies for Children moved in with MassINC in their office at 11 Beacon Street. And it has been wonderful to be part, even, to be part of the team in the office space. And it's just been great to be here. And we are excited to think about opportunities to work together. So, Joe, our first question for everybody as they join is for you to tell us a little bit about you and how you came to be in your current role.
Well, thanks, Amy, and thanks to everyone for being here. It's been great getting to know Amy and getting to know strategies over the last couple of years. So I am the CEO of MassINC, which is a nonprofit civic organization. We're 29 years old this year, and we are working to make Massachusetts a place of economic opportunity and civic vitality, and we do that through our three divisions. I'm going to explain us a little, and then I'll tell you about me. But we have a policy center that does research on a variety of policy issues and a lot of work in the education space. We have a polling group called the MassINC Polling Group, and hopefully you're familiar with Commonwealth Beacon, our civic news journal, which is a free news publication covering state government and state policy. I got here 2 years ago, just celebrated my 2-year anniversary. And I came here after spending nearly 30 years at the Massachusetts Association of Community Development Corporations. The last 20 as executive director. And community development corporations are nonprofit organizations working largely in low-income communities, but also in rural and suburban areas to provide economic opportunity. They do a lot of affordable housing development, but also are involved in other efforts to uplift low and moderate income people. Many of them actually own buildings in which child care centers operate, and a couple of them actually operate child care programs themselves. The 30 years there followed going to Northeastern University Law School, class of 93. And that's when I kind of learned about community development and affordable housing and decided I wanted to make that my career. Um, Prior to law school, I had worked in the what we called the safe energy movement. Now it's the clean energy movement. I started my career in Washington, D.C., working for Ralph Nader, um, doing energy work. And that followed growing up in Syracuse, New York, and going to SUNY Binghamton. So that's my resume in a nutshell.
No,
Um,
I didn't know that you went to law school. Look at that. See, I said,
well, I let that secret out every now and again. Um,
and you said you grew up in Syracuse, and in the invite we shared the op-ed, or it's the editorial, no, the op-ed that you wrote for
yeah,
Boston Globe. So can you tell us a little bit about that, how that came to be, and kind of all those connections?
sure. So, for those who saw the op-ed, you know that I grew up in Syracuse, and my parents enrolled me and my brother in a voluntary school busing program in 1969, which was obviously a time when people were trying to do a lot of different things to overcome segregation. And so we were put on a bus and sent across town to a school that was in a pretty much all black neighborhood at that time, surrounded by public housing. So not just black, but also low income. So it was quite a culture shock for everybody. And I went there for 4 years, but I learned a lot, not fully articulated at that age, I suppose, about how our society deals with race, the differences that exist, but also the similarities across race. And throughout my childhood, political and social movements were a big part of our family. My dad was very active in peace work. My mom was big in the women's movement. My brother, when he got a little older, became an environmentalist. So I think I was destined to do political and policy work. Um, and I'm still kind of deeply connected to Syracuse. I think everyone who's from Syracuse feels that way. We have a bit of a joke about that. And I go back all the time. My dad's still alive. And, as I've come to learn about what they're doing in that neighborhood to revitalize it, to improve the schools and the housing, I've just been keeping an eye on it. So when I got to MassINC and realized that we're doing some research in that space, I decided to go visit and learn more specifically about what the city of Syracuse, the housing authority, the school district, and community-based organizations are trying to do to create a truly thriving mixed income neighborhood where kids across incomes can get an education and thrive. And it's really exciting. And it turns out that's happening in lots of places around the country. And the national organization that is driving a lot of this work is called Purpose Built Communities. They started in Atlanta, also in 1996, same year as MassINC. And the CEO of Purpose Built Communities is coming to Boston on February 12th and 13th to do an event with us and meet with stakeholders. So I encourage you to come. It's February 12th. When I get a chance, I'll put that in the chat or we'll send it out afterwards. But MassINC believes passionately, as do I personally, that if we're really serious about overcoming segregation in the educational system, we have to overcome segregation in the housing and neighborhoods in which we live. And so you have to do those things together. You can't do one and not the other. It won't be sustainable. That was certainly a lesson I take away from my experience in Syracuse. So that's what we're trying to do. And we're really excited about it. And I should mention that the Syracuse strategy includes the construction of a new early childhood center. It's a big part of what they're doing. They just got a grant for that. And certainly when we think about what a neighborhood needs, it needs support for children, from birth all the way through adulthood.
And so thank you for that, Joe. I added the link of the op-ed, and when Joe and I talked about it before the op-ed came out, I said, "Well, are you going to talk about childcare and young children?" He said, "Yes." He said that's part of the plan in Syracuse, and I think that's many of you know Ben Foreman, who is also here at MassINC, and he's working on kind of community schools. I also, every time I see Ben, I'm like, how are we thinking about early ed? What do you think about this? So just even physically being here to think about how we can connect the work. And even if it doesn't show up in the policy, but just to know that we're all aware of kind of all these different systems. Joe, can you talk a little bit about, because I've learned a lot about MassINC. I thought I knew a lot about it, but the three different areas. So that, can you talk about Commonwealth Magazine? Because it's incredible what they are producing. And I'll put the link in chat for Commonwealth Beacon. But just tell us a little bit about that,
Sure. So Commonwealth Beacon used to be called Commonwealth Magazine,
which
and
I just
starting in
love it. Yes.
1996, we published a quarterly print magazine. Um, but in 2018, the organization decided to stop printing the magazine for all the reasons that many news organizations are stopped printing magazines and newspapers. It's very, very expensive, and more people want to read their news digitally. So we became fully digital in 2018. But we realized, or the folks here realized, that being a fully digital publication is different than being a magazine. And so we spent the last several years trying to fully complete that transformation. Our mission is to cover state government, to hold our government accountable with good original reporting, and also to make sure that citizens and participants in our democracy, have the information they need to be effective in that role. So we have a small team. We have 5 reporters right now, 5 reporters and editors. We have a director of audience engagement who's trying to get more people to read our journalism. And we're really part of a national movement in nonprofit journalism that is seeking to fill the gap being created by the devastation in the for-profit model. So we're part of a group called the Institute for Nonprofit News. There's over 400 nonprofit news organizations around the country, and we're obviously one of the oldest. Most of them are 5 years, maybe 10 years old at the most. So we have a lot of experience, but being being old is both good and bad, as all of us know that have gotten old ourselves. It brings a lot of experience and wisdom, but you can be a little bit stuck in your ways. So we're really going through a pretty rapid transformation here at Commonwealth Beacon. We've just hired a new editor, Laura Colarusso, who's bringing a ton of new ideas and energy. And we're hoping to grow our subscribers, grow our donors, and grow our impact by covering more topics, more in depth. We're trying to tell the stories that others aren't, and to go deeper with more context than maybe the Globe or other daily news organizations can do. So I encourage you to subscribe to our daily newsletters. They're free. All of our news is free. There's no paywall, and we're very proud of it, and we're excited about the growth that's ahead. The MassINC polling group is a for-profit subsidiary of MassINC, because we like to do things complicated here. And it's been around since 2010 and does all sorts of survey research for different clients. And obviously, a lot of that is just political polling. It was sort of started as, because we did a lot of polling for news organizations, but it's really evolved. And a lot of our survey work now is for government and nonprofit clients who want to understand what's happening with their constituencies. So we did a poll for the Mass Commission for the Blind to find out, how visually impaired people were doing and what services they need. We've done polls for nonprofits who want to survey their clients to see if they're getting the services they need. We're surveying every MRVP tenant in the state right now. That's a rental voucher program, to see how that program is working for them. So we have a real diversity of clients and projects. And then, the Policy Center is sort of what some might call a think tank, but we publish research that's oriented toward public policy, lots of data to try to inform the discussion. And we are very focused on being nonpartisan, evidence-driven. We have a very diverse board with Republicans and Democrats and independents, and we really adhere to that in a very, committed way.
I just put the link to the event for school-centered neighborhood development.
Thank you.
And we've talked with Ben about the early childhood agenda and the work that we're thinking about for local infrastructure. And so we're really excited. I RSVP for the event, so I'll be there. And I think I've just been overwhelmed by Commonwealth Beacon, because to have a daily news, I mean, even on the weekends, it's a daily, so the reporters are working. If you check the website out, it's incredible to see how much they're covering, and without a paywall, which is incredible.
And
I'm
Amy,
gonna
I
go to
should
the
say, if I could, just on
Sure.
Commonwealth, we publish about 400 op-eds a year from maybe 400, from a very diverse contributor base. And anybody is welcome to submit an op-ed at any time. You can do so through the website. And we're always looking for new and diverse voices. Um, about 800 words is a good target. And we want them to be interesting and not sort of the same old, same old. But please keep that in mind. And I see a few shout outs to Syracuse in the chat. Yes, I do know Peter Dunn. Turns out after the op-ed, he reached out to me. He knew my mother. May she rest in peace. So, and I see another Syracuse native on the call. There's always a Syracuse person in any.
Yes. Well, that's so you beat me to the chat. Tom Weber also shares it was a great op-ed, Joe, and an important and fantastic framing of a comprehensive approach, including ECE to community revitalization. Kate Warren Barnes says, I still have copies of the old copies of the magazine, and I have to say, around the office are covers of the magazine, and it really is a place. And the physical magazine was it. Like I know we worked often with the editor. To make sure that we submitted op-eds, but just it really was kind of. I just talked to a legislative staffer, and they said that the two publications that they used to read cover to cover was Commonwealth Magazine and People Magazine. So that's high praise. Um, so Joe, when you think about your work, oh, Mary Kay Leonard says, I never miss a day of Commonwealth Beacon. It is terrific. And then lots of New Yorks. Now, Joe, are you a Red Sox fan or a Yankees fan? I get the question we're all thinking.
I grew up a Cincinnati Reds fan because when you live in Syracuse, you can pick any team you want. So it's amazing. In the early 1970s, I picked all the good teams: the Cincinnati Reds, the New York Knicks, the Chicago Blackhawks, and the Washington Redskins. But I am now all Boston all the time.
Right. Yes. Joe and I often have a sports moment talking about the Celtics. And last night was a great game. Celtics won. Joe, can you talk a little bit about your 30 years and working in housing and the CDC? Can you talk about that experience? What did you learn? What advice would you have when you think about folks like us who are advocating for very similar issues? And maybe where you see connections in the housing world that we should think about?
Sure. Well, I mean, so community development corporations are nonprofit organizations, and by definition, they have to have a board of directors that is representative of the community they're serving. And the Department of the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities actually certified CDCs under a state law that we wrote that defines what community-based means. And obviously, that's always a little squishy. But the fundamental idea of CDCs is that if we're going to build housing in any particular neighborhood and people are going to make money by building and operating housing in our neighborhood, it should be a community organization so that money and wealth can recycle into the community. And so the community has a significant voice in what gets built and who it serves. And that was what attracted me to the community development movement to begin with, the idea that you create a real business model for funding community-based activities. So CDCs are able to take the profits from the real estate development and use it for any number of services, whether it's for their residents and their tenants or for the broader community. And that's a model that I felt passionate about. And my job was to make sure that CDCs were successful and got their fair share of the housing dollars. So I know what it's like to sort of advocate for a subset of a sector. And we constantly had to struggle with, when do we fight for the CDCs and when do we fight for the sector as a whole? And how do we deal with the sort of implicit competition between CDCs as housing developers and private companies and larger nonprofits? Politically, it's useful to have a big tent, but obviously within the tent, there's some jockeying. I imagine that happens in childcare. And I think, both things are necessary. And so we had to navigate some of those politics. And I think taking the big view generally worked out better. I think that the power of community-based work, and working at a neighborhood level where the scale of the challenge is huge, but it's not so huge as to be overwhelming, is another, power of doing this work at the neighborhood level. Housing is obviously a huge issue. Despite all of our success as a state, things have gotten worse. So maybe we don't have as much success as we think. What can I say that you don't already know? I mean,
Yeah,
obviously,
well,
we build a lot more affordable housing. We need to
Right.
do it more efficiently. We have a very expensive system. We put a lot of layers on it to make it more expensive. We complicate it probably more than we should. Um, and I think having a diverse sector ultimately is probably more helpful, but notwithstanding those challenges. In terms of um, I think integrating childcare into where people live, obviously is an important strategy. So a lot of affordable housing developments often have community space or extra space that can be used for childcare. A lot of CDCs do mixed use development, which also can create space for childcare. But then there's family-based childcare providers. Sometimes it's challenging to do in subsidized housing. I honestly don't know all the rules about that and when you can,
Right.
can't. So there might be some work that could be done collaboratively there to make it easier for people to have childcare in their homes.
And I think we're seeing that. And we know that Nursery has a kind of incubator space that they have the lab that's in Bromley Heath, and they are now experimenting with having family childcare providers in there, in space in there, being licensed as independent family childcare providers as they then think about the future where they could open their own.
And I know
Uh,
that Jamaica Plain Neighborhood Development Corporation, and I don't know if Viet still does it, but they had programs where they
yeah,
supported home daycare providers with some of the administrative aspects of that business.
that's right. Tom Weber says, I view SFC and MassINC in very similar ways, absolutely essential and unique civic institutions. It's too easy to take for granted and need our active support. Thank you both. Tom Weber also shared with me that he worked for both SFC and MassINC. So there's always a Tom Weber connection. Ron Dorsey says, let's do a learning trip to Detroit to see the Mary Grove Conservancy, maybe the best example of a school-based development right in America right now. Thank you for that, Ron. Mary Kay Leonard says CDCs also work on small business development, but only if you support family childcare. This is an area where better linkages. So thank you for that, Mary Kay.
Yeah, if I
Um,
could say something on that, Amy, CDCs and a lot of other groups, small business development is a big part. And one of the things I worked on a lot at MACDC was the Small Business Technical Assistance Program, which I saw the governor put $7.5 million in the budget for. This was a $2 million program before the pandemic, and now it's $7.5 million. And it supports both community-based small business programs, but also sector-based small business programs. Because, think about it, if you work at a CDC and you're helping small businesses and you've got restaurants and you've got retail and you've got landscaping and you've got construction and you've got childcare. It's hard to be an expert in all those industries. They each
right,
have their own wrinkles and complexities. So there are some organizations that focus on specific sectors. And so there is a funding for that MACDC helped create. And, whether is it through a CDC or through an organization specialized, I think there is opportunity to create more support for the entrepreneurial aspects of running a childcare business.
right. And then kind of as we close out, do with the op-ed and kind of the lessons learned, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think would be that you see happening in Syracuse? We also know, as we've done our work over the past almost 25 years, it's usually the same people in these communities. They may have different acronyms after their name, but so much of this comes right down to the people who are doing this work. So can you talk a little bit about that, kind of what you see in Syracuse and some of those lessons that we can think about for here?
Well, I don't want to pretend how involved I am in Syracuse, but I will say that the coalition in that neighborhood that's working, is by design a intersectional, cross-sectional, whatever you kind of call it, coalition that includes public and private and for-profit companies. It includes nonprofits across a range of services because in any community there's a new health center in the neighborhood. They're building the new schools, both public and private.
Yep.
Um, there's both private housing and public housing being developed. So it's a pretty, and managing that kind of coalition is difficult. That's part of what purpose-built communities provide support on, how to navigate that. And they have this idea of a community quarterback that kind of serves
Mm,
as a coordinator. I will say one issue we're working on that I just wanted to mention, I was thinking about this earlier, is, we're doing a lot of work in educator diversity for the K through 12 system, both because we know we need more educators of color to support our children and our students, but also because we have just a shortage of teachers, period. of any race or background. I suspect that we have the same challenge in childcare and maybe some of the same things that we're learning in educator diversity work for K through 12. Maybe there's more going on than I know about. Amy, we should talk about it, but it strikes me as a place where MassINC might be able to engage.
That's been great. Yes. And I know, Joe, that you and I have also talked about early literacy and what that could look like and kind of some of these issues that are cross-cutting across education. And we would say, it starts in early ed. So how do we, that's been our mantra for years about if we just, get it right when children are little, it's easier to think about, the long-term effects, and kind of, especially for each child's development, when you think about all that we can put in place. Joe, any closing thoughts? I see Victoria is here from Mass Taxpayers, so I'll maybe give you a minute, Victoria, to plug your event. But Joe, any other thoughts you have for us this morning?
No, just appreciate the opportunity to say hello. Please reach out if you have thoughts about what MassINC or any of our teams could be doing. That would be helpful, and hope to see some of you on the 12th at our event.
Thanks so much, Joe. And as we finish this week on the 9:30 call, I just want to give a quick preview for next week on the 9:30 call. On Monday, we're going to hear from Kim Dion from the Massachusetts Resource and Referral Agencies. We know there's been a lot of questions about vouchers and subsidies. Tuesday, we're going to hear from Stephanie Heron Rice, who's the Attorney and Racial Justice Fellow at Greater Boston Legal Services. Wednesday, we're going to hear from Liz Sweet, who's the Executive Director at MIRA, the Mass Immigrant and Refugee Coalition. And then on Thursday, we're going to hear from Jock Payton, who is the founder and CEO of Nubian Square Investments, who's been working with educators thinking about long-term kind of financial planning. So this has been an incredible week here on the 9:30 call. We're so happy that Joe could close it out today. And Victoria, I'm going to give a quick update on I shared a little bit, I don't know if you were on, about where we are in the budget process.
Sure. Thanks, Amy. Everyone feel free to register for the event or email me if you have questions or can't make it. We'll also be recording our presentation and I'll be coming on the 9:30 call on February 6th to give a debrief from the larger presentation. But essentially, we're going to give a big overview of the governor's budget in general, spending and revenue, what that means for early ed, and breaking down the different key programs we're all tracking. And then we'll be giving a roadmap of what the next steps in the process are, both for the operating budget for FY 2026. And as Amy mentioned, there's a second supplemental budget that's moving as well that has implications for early ed. So we're tracking both.
Victoria, thank you for that. And I'm sure I jumbled the words as it's all new, but are we also expecting a supplemental potentially for FY 25?
I don't know
Okay.
on timeline for that right now. There's usually kind of a couple that come throughout the session as we're about halfway through the fiscal year right now. But so right now there's two, the 26 and the supplemental surtax fair share.
That goes along for next fiscal year.
Yeah. So this is funding that will be moving at the same time as the FY 26 budget, but separate vehicles.
And that's a little different than we've seen in recent budget.
This is the first one that's like this, that it's essentially allocating funds that came in from the Fair Share Millionaires Tax the past 2 years, and surplus funds that were collected but not spent yet. So now we get to spend them.
Always a new opportunity to learn as things are always changing. So just when you think you know the budget process, it's not. You're gonna record the MTF, you're gonna record the budget event, but you're not live streaming it.
Yes, we will record it and send it out, and naturally feel free to share it to the full list you have as well.
Great. All right, Joe, thanks so much for joining us. Victoria, thank you for that 2-minute update. We appreciate it. And then we'll see folks. And as we've said this week, we've had a lot of new people join the 9:30 call this week. So please, everybody is welcome on this call. We'll send the calendar for next week and you forward that along. And we'll look forward to seeing you then. Have a great day.
Yeah.
Take care.